Welcome to this Club Development Scotland webinar for Bowls Scotland. Today we're going to be looking at community asset transfers for your Bowls Club. My name's Alan Russell. I'm joined by my colleague Andrew Jenkin. We both work with Club Development Scotland. Our background is in football and we're part of the Supporters Direct Scotland organisation. Over the last few years we've started taking the work we've originally done in football and introducing that to other sports. So we're delighted to be with you today for one of these first webinars that we've done for Bowls Scotland, looking at community asset transfers. In the webinar today, we're going to touch on a number of areas. So we'll give you a quick overview of the session. So we're going to refer to community asset transfers as CATs, just as shorthand. Define that, what that means, who can undertake a CAT, and what it means for a club to undertake that CAT process. What are the challenges? What are the benefits? What are the things you need to think about in advance before starting? There are different options for a CAT. Often when you think about community asset transfer, you think about taking ownership of the asset, but that's not the only way that you can get more control, more influence over the Bowls club or the pavilion that you're using. So we'll look at different options there on ownership, on lease, and so on. We'll address what it means to really understand if that asset is suitable for a transfer. So what are the questions you need to ask yourself to say, is it genuinely an asset or is it actually a liability? The process is well established and has been documented by the Scottish Government through its legislation. And there are some other resources that other organisations have developed that are really, really helpful. And we're particularly going to draw on some resources that the Development Trust Association Scotland have developed, and also the Scottish Football Association, who have put a lot of support in place for football clubs going through the same process. And essentially the process is identical, regardless of what sport that you're working in, although the facilities are obviously very different, but the steps that you have to follow through and the thought process that you need to work on are very transferable between sports. The big hard piece of work around a CAT is to document your feasibility study and your business plan. They're essential things in order to go through that process and to put that to a local authority. So we'll give you an overview about what's involved in those two pieces of work. And then a bit of a takeaway is the 10 steps to successful community asset transfer and the skills that you need to do it. If this was a live webinar, we would have a question and answer session at the end, but we'll leave you with some contact details for us so that you can get in touch, ask questions. Anything that we need to clarify, we'll then document in a frequently asked questions document that can go out a short while after this webinar.
So just looking at what a community asset transfer actually entails, what does it mean? So as Alan mentioned there, it is referring to the transfer and or ownership, and we'll touch upon the difference between that in a minute, of public land and buildings, and that's usually from a local authority, so from the local council, to a community organisation for less than the market value. That's kind of dependent on demonstration of your social, economic or environmental benefit, and again we'll touch upon what that means in practice later on. But this has really been, I mean, Scotland's got quite a long history of transfer of assets to community organisations, but this was really very formalised in 2014 with the Community Empowerment Act, and it really just enshrines the opportunity for community organisations to request ownership and to lease community buildings. It requires those owners of those buildings, usually as we say, the local authority or the local council, to consider that application and to agree to the transfer if it's a reasonable request, basically. So where the bit about social value is important is where the transfer is sought, but for a below market rate. That means that the community organisation need to show the sort of additional social value that they're going to bring to the running of that facility. And that's probably quite key. So if you're going to get a community, a council asset for less than its worth on the marketplace, then how are you going to show that you're going to be giving added value to running that and going to be offering something that perhaps the local authority currently aren't doing, or potentially don't have the potential to do, I guess. So this really is a kind of shift in the power balance between community organisations, and it's a really good opportunity to secure ownership and the management and running of facilities that you might already be operating, you might not be operating, but you wish to operate. So there's kind of a difference there as well between whether this is something that you would like to have more ownership of, or something that you're currently already involved in, but you want to cement it a bit further. Uh, in terms of sports facilities to date, there's relatively few examples of community asset transfers to sports facilities, and that is because of their profitability. So most community asset transfers that have happened have been assets that perhaps don't have an income generation model behind them. So the majority have been libraries, for example, where there's more of a cost associated with them than potential profit. So for sports facilities that can turn over quite a bit of money, it has been harder historically to have those transferred. However, that doesn't mean it's impossible, and there, around 11% of transfers have involved sport, and this is when we'll just touch upon how good your feasibility study and the nuts and bolts of it. And that's really where the detail will come into it.
I think on that point there, in order for ownership to transfer to a sports club of the facility, that's where this demonstration of social, economic, environmental benefit is really important. And particularly in the current funding environment for local authorities, where services are under real pressure, if you can demonstrate that you'll be helping the local authority or you'll be replacing the current service that a local authority delivers with a greater social impact, delivering a service that's not possible under the local authority to the community, then that's the thing that turns this in from a no into a maybe, and from a maybe into a yes. So it's not just about your sporting outcomes and your sporting programs and the sporting activity. It's what service does your community need that's currently being delivered partly or not being delivered at all by the local authority, that you would be able to deliver on their behalf if you just had more control over the facility. So it's that equation that you need to stack up. What's the local authority currently doing? What would it like to do that's not possible within the current funding challenges? And what would you be able to do as a sports club operating that facility that's more than just providing that sporting facility and sporting activity to your community, but doing something more than that? And those may be things that you're already doing as a club. So a lot of clubs have a social purpose. A lot of them have a charitable purpose, and making more emphasis of that in your application to a local authority to take on the facility is likely to get you a successful application for a community asset transfer.
I think, as well as Alan has said there, the current climate is probably going to lead to more opportunities for community asset transfers as well. So I think kind of recent research has showed that that council-owned facilities are in real danger of not reopening again. So if communities want these facilities to keep on offering, the services that they do, that's going to present an opportunity for them to kind of group together and make something of the community asset, really, and to take it forward. So if groups can be organized and structured in their approach to this, I suspect that the current climate and the kind of consequences of coronavirus upon local authorities will present a real opportunity for community groups. Just looking at the criteria guide, so something that is really important to touch upon is who is actually eligible to undertake a community asset transfer. And the first one that we're going to talk about here on the left is about being a constituted community group that is community controlled. So in practice, what that means is particularly if you want to transfer the asset from ownership to the sports club or to the group, it really needs to be incorporated. So if you're currently unincorporated, we would really recommend you consider incorporation to offer you as people involved in the committee more protection, but also that it's being transferred to a legal entity rather than a group of individuals, essentially. So
And that is a hard requirement from the legislation for a transfer of ownership. Local authorities won't entertain an application from an unincorporated club. You can start the process if you're being unincorporated, but before the ownership is transferred, they will require you to be incorporated as a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation, or a community interest company, or a community benefit society. That's for ownership. For transfer to take on an extended lease on the facility, there's not that hard requirement, but it's still good practice to be incorporated.
Yes, and as Helen says there, if it is for a lease rather than for ownership, incorporation is less of a requirement, but you will still need to be community controlled. So that will mean you'll still need to allow people to join your organization. You'll have to have, very open AGMs and elections, and allow community influence in how you are run, essentially. We're going to look very briefly at those different legal structures on the next slide, but just to touch on these two other points. So one of these is we're going to look at a bit later on. So the sort of demonstrating a sustainable business plan, that's really going to be the strength of your application. So how are you going to show that, essentially a local authority aren't going to want to transfer an asset to a group that they aren't convinced can run the asset sustainably? Mm-hmm. So you're going to need to really put a lot of work into demonstrating how you're going to run it, showing that your numbers make sense, and we'll look at a lot of that kind of detail later on, as we say. And then, as we've already touched upon, the ability to demonstrate your community benefit, your social value from the transfer. What is it that the community is going to be able to benefit from with you either leasing it or managing the asset, or owning the asset indeed?
This gives an overview of 7 different legal structures that are available to sports clubs. And we won't go through this slide in detail, but this does say that if you're currently unincorporated as a club, there are different routes that you can go down, and there are pros and cons of each. So most people are very familiar with companies limited by shares and companies limited by guarantee. They're regulated by Companies House. They're what people normally refer to when they just say the word a company. It's a company that's at Companies House, has articles of association, it's regulated, it needs to do its annual return. There are differences in terms of company limited by guarantee, company limited by share, and that's really whether they issue shares or not. But companies limited by guarantee can have charitable status and asset locks in place. The other form of incorporation that Companies House offer is, or support, regulate, is community interest companies. These are a fairly new type of legal entity, and are very, they're a very good structure, particularly for people who are familiar with companies and regulation by Companies House. All that changes is this different form. There's a different form of articles. There's different. You need to be very clear about your community purpose, your community benefit that you offer. You're still able to issue shares, and you're able to have an asset lock. So it takes almost the best of both worlds from a company limited by shares, company limited by guarantee, and adds in that community focus. So that's just a very good structure that's been introduced there. Community benefit societies are quite similar in a lot of ways to community interest companies in that they're democratic organisation. They're one member, one vote, but they have a different regulator. The Financial Conduct Authority regulates community benefit societies, and a lot of organisations find that's a slightly lighter form of regulation. It's easier to navigate, and it may be more suitable for clubs, for organisations that are run largely by volunteers. That may be an easier structure to take on if you're currently unincorporated. The big one that's on there, Scottish Charitable Incorporated Organisation, SCIOs for short. That's the Scottish name for a charity. That's a really popular one for sports clubs, because we find a lot of sports clubs are doing an awful lot more than just offering a sport. So in your bowls club, you may be trying to widen access. You may be trying to offer a sporting activity for a disadvantaged part of the community, or for a demographic within your community. Or there may be a partnership that you have with community organisations that allow them to use your pavilion, your clubhouse, for some things that they're doing. So Scottish Charitable Incorporation incorporated organisation is a really good structure to have if you have that wider community purpose, because it allows you to then register for gift aid, allows you to apply for funding for different organisations than you would otherwise be able to. So it's not a light regulation. So OSCR are very, very particular about what they're looking for you to do and how they're looking for you to structure yourself. But the benefits in terms of those different ways of raising additional funds are really, really significant. So we're finding more sports clubs, particularly community sports clubs in all sports. I think there are a few in bowls in Scotland. We have a few in football, in athletics, and in many other sports in Scotland that have incorporated as charities in order to get those advantages and to be really, really clear about what it is that they're offering through encouraging active, healthy lives and mental well-being.
And we are doing a workshop with Bowls Scotland specifically on legal structures. So if any of this is sort of perked an interest or you want to find out more, then please do get in touch with the Bowls Scotland team to find out a bit more about how you can attend that workshop.
And just to reiterate the point we're making earlier, if you're interested in an ownership CAT, you will need to adopt one of these legal structures. But there's lots of choices, as I say, lots of pros and cons between them. If you're looking at a lease, you don't have to adopt an incorporation, but it's very good protection for you as committee of that club, and it helps you just to demonstrate to your members and to your local community that you're serious about what you're doing, and demonstrate to the local authority you're looking to get more control of your facility, that you are going to run it properly.
Absolutely. So a couple of important considerations for your club if you are thinking of undertaking a community asset transfer. These are just some of the things you'll want to really think about before you make a decision, or actually in terms of progressing as your application progresses as well. So the first thing is really something that Alan touched upon there. What are your objectives of an organization? If your objectives are not aligned to something that involves owning and running a facility, then it's perhaps not really worth thinking about. However, if it is around the facilitation of bowls particularly, then it's very likely that it will involve some form of facility, so it might be worthwhile progressing. You also want to think about who actually is your community. Now, that might already be quite clear in your mind as to who is part of your membership, but in terms of your sort of geographical community as well, who is it that you could help service through the running of bowls, for example? Is there, if they're disadvantaged groups, as Alan mentioned, that you could reach out to, and you could increase access to participation in the sport of bowls? And what are the kind of other benefits that would bring to them? Is it about tackling social isolation, for example, or loneliness, or is it about the physical activity and benefit of participating in bowls as well? Other things you're going to want to think about are what kind of land you actually need. There's no point in getting a community asset transfer for a football pitch if you're interested in running bowls, for example. So really being very clear about what it is. And if you're currently already in a bowls club and you're obviously using a bowls club, is it something that you want to cement further with actually legislating it, putting it for a community asset transfer? One you might want to think about, as we said, is whether or not you are eligible, as we touched upon on the previous slide, but also whether or not you're going to want to do a lease or a transfer of the ownership itself. So that's quite an important one, really, and we're going to touch upon the kind of key differences in the following slides.
So the main benefits of a community asset transfer is what it can do for your club and for your community. So will it give you the security, the confidence that you need to be able to go out to your community and to commit to doing something with them, for them, for a long period of time? Having that security of tenancy or that ownership of the facility will then mean you can commit to long-term plans in ways that you might not if you're unsure of your long-term rights to use that facility. You're able to bring the community together through a project like a community asset transfer, and get behind a big project, a big ideal that they can work together towards. And I think increasing capacity within the community to do big things is something people don't automatically think of. But if you think of some of the tasks that are required just to go through a community asset transfer process, but also what it means to run a facility, that gives an opportunity to give people experience of doing something that they may struggle to find that experience. And that's particularly important for young people within your community. So if you're taking on a facility that you want to run, that you want to develop, that you want to explore new ways of engaging with the community, to give somebody from that community, a young person, that experience, that's going to look terrific on their CV. So it allows you to bring people into your club for the opportunities it presents to them. The third one on the slide there, that's particularly around, well, it's not just around charities, but if you are a charity, if you've got a clear community purpose, that will allow you to apply for funds that may not be open to you already. Also, just taking on the facility to develop it, to enhance it, to take ownership of it. There are funders that do that, even if it's just a sports objective that you're doing, if you're not a charity. And partnerships and collaborations at a local level are really important. And we're going to come to this later in the webinar, where we talk about what kind of partnerships you can form as a bowls club that will allow you to enter a community asset transfer. One of the things that we're finding over the last few years is that single club applications or single use applications for a facility are looked on less favorably by local authorities than multi-club or multi-use applications. I mean, what does that mean in practice? It means either finding a way to make an application for a multi-sport community asset transfer, where you can maybe be part of a community hub, a community sports hub, so there'd be bowls happening there, but there may be some other sports as well, or taking your current bowling green and pavilion and saying, so what else could we do on this site? What groups could we involve in this? And can we make a formal partnership with a community group that needs some space to meet, but it's not doing bowls, but maybe using your pavilion in a time of day or a time of the week where you're not using it, and actually forging a really strong partnership and cementing that partnership through a community asset transfer as partners in a lease or partners in ownership of that facility. That allows you to do an awful lot more, and that gives you a great platform to build on and do more. It gives you a very strong local focus. It gives you a connection to maybe a part of your community that you don't know already, and those things can help for sports development as well. So people may come to you for another reason entirely, but while they're there, they get interested in bowls. They never thought bowls was a sport for them. They thought it was for, they've got a stereotype about what somebody who plays bowls is like, and they didn't think that was them. But actually, having been around there, I think, well, that looks fun, and I could do that. So that's what we really mean by creating these partnerships and collaborations, is that it helps you to achieve more, but it may also give your sport a new lease of life, and have you engaging with a different part of your community than you've ever done before.
So as we mentioned, there are different types of tenure that you can get with a community asset transfer, and there's really three main types that we're going to touch upon here. The first is outright ownership, so that's the transfer of the ownership of the asset from the council to you as the bowls club. Now, the advantages of this is that you actually have ownership of it. You can sort of ultimately you can do what you want with it. It gives you some sort of sense of stability in that you have a sustainable source of income potentially. You're not paying an annual fee to rent it, so your facility costs might drop, and you have the freedom to develop it as you see fit. The kind of disadvantages of ownership are it's quite a big jump. In fact, it's a very big jump to make. Owning something outright can really be a bit of a challenge, especially financially. So not only might there be the upfront cost of purchasing the facility itself, but then you are kind of solely responsible for its upkeep and maintenance. Something terrible goes wrong in your sort of second or third year, there's nobody there to sort of support you or bail you out with those costs that you might have potentially with a lease, or even if you're just renting it. So it's kind of a big challenge, and it'll probably take a bit of a strain on the governance structure of your bowls club as well. So you need to have the right kind of skill sets in there in that sense. The next step down from this is a lease, which is a bit of a midway point really, in that you can negotiate this for a number of years. You can often do this perhaps as a starter to see what it's like actually owning it. And it's a good place to perhaps think about starting, because it gives you a bit more freedom that you perhaps currently had when you were renting. And you might be paying a fairly low rent fee as well. This all comes down to how you negotiate the lease itself, by the way. But there are, the advantages of not being solely responsible for it as well. So if you are renting it, or sorry, leasing it, you're reducing your expensive rent, and you're given more freedom as well. So it's an interesting point to start with. And actually, a lot of organizations are starting off with a lease, perhaps for a couple of years, because it gives them the opportunity and the feel of what it would be like to manage it and own it outright. So it's a good place to see if there's any kind of skeletons in the cupboard, and then see how the facility runs, and actually if it is going to be profitable for your organization, or actually if it turns out that it's going to be a massive drain, then you're only tied in for a couple of years as well. So this could be a good place to start. And then the third one is license to occupy, which again is perhaps just a step up from renting. And this is kind of formal written permission to occupy for a short period. It again has the kind of benefit of you're not solely responsible for costs if anything goes wrong, and you get to maintain it at the current kind of agreed usage levels as well. So it's kind of again a bit of a midway point between what you might currently be doing and a lease. Is there anything you want to add to that, Alan?
I think one thing is about alterations, development of the facility. That's one thing that changes in each of these three types of tenure. So really, if you have a license to occupy, the facility is as it is, and you don't normally have very much opportunity to make any changes to that facility, to develop it, other than the very, very basic maintenance. Maintenance is often done by the owner of the facility still. With a long-term lease, you can negotiate permission to make changes to it, to develop it, to invest in the facility. You're responsible for repairs usually with the lease, unless you're able to negotiate. That the owner still takes responsibility for that. But usually with the lease, you're responsible for the repairs, but you're also able to make changes. However, you're making changes to somebody else's facility. So any money you spend on it, you don't get that back. And if your lease ends, then the improvements that you've made to the club, to the facility, you lose that money. Ownership, when you make those changes, you make those improvements to the facility, you're improving the value of that, you're increasing the value of the asset, and if you decide that you no longer need that asset, you can sell it, and so you get the benefit back. So that very sort of basic financial benefit, and also financial impact of maintaining and developing a facility is different in each of these three types of tenure. So I think that's the one that often clubs have lots of interest in a community asset transfer, because they want to improve the facility. And we've found that in many sports, one of the frustrations about the current arrangements are that the facility is not maintained to the level the club want, and maybe not maintained as quickly as the club want it to. So you end up with a lot of frustration, a lot of arguments with the owner of the facility, trying to get them out to change things, to modify things. And it's much easier to do that if you have control of it, and you know that you're able to just go in, make the changes that you need to your club.
And we should also highlight that you can have a lease agreement with an option to buy in the future as well. So it's not necessarily just one or the other with some of these. You can kind of have a bit of negotiation. There's a lot of room and flexibility to have negotiations with the local council with these. So again,
I think that works for both sides as well. So it'll work for you as a club, but it's also good for the local authority to see that you're serious about taking on that facility. But in the period of that lease, they get a long look at you, about your credibility, about whether you do the things that you said you would do when you enter discussions about it, and that may build confidence that you are the club that they want to hand over ownership to further down the line, and it may reduce the price as well, because it's less of a risk for the local authority to transfer ownership to you than it would be to a club that they maybe don't know as well.
Yeah, and actually this is sort of reflected within studies on the amount of community asset transfers that have happened to date. So the kind of dominant factor on whether a council either decide to sell it or transfer it or lease it, for example, it seems to be on whether or not they can raise the funds. However, actually 90% found that in instances of community asset transfers, they've used lease conditions to get that balance right between ultimately maintaining ultimate ownership of the facility, but perhaps reducing some of the risk as well. So as Alan says, that probably works best for most or but both sides of the party really. You've got less risk, they've got less risk as well. So it's often a good place to start. They're more likely to say yes, you're more likely to get the green light from them in that sense.
And you're likely to find out what it's really going to take to run that facility. So you may change your minds after a period of greater control over it, but without being fully committed to taking on ownership. Or you'll find out what you need in your club that you don't have already in terms of skills, abilities, and how you need to develop as a club in order to take that on.
Yeah.
So in terms of suitability, a lot of this is quite technical work that you need to do about the condition of the facility, of the building, of the land, any kind of legal issues around that, around boundaries, or around the condition of the site and of the other things that are around your club. But starting off by thinking, what does your club need now, the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? So what are your aspirations for developing your club, developing your facility, and developing the programs, the activities, and the membership of your club? Are you going to need more than you currently have? Are you going to need less than you currently have? And that's, for a bowling club, that's probably more thinking about the pavilion than the bowling green. The bowling greens are fairly standard things, I think. But it may be you have an aspiration to grow rapidly, and you might want space for a second green or an indoor facility, if that's the aspirations of your club. But in terms of your pavilion, what do you want to be doing in that asset over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And what would you need to develop about the facility in order to meet those aspirations? Getting a technical assessment of the asset itself, the physical asset, about what work is needing to be done and how much that's going to cost. That's one of the biggest things about this, the unexpected costs that may come out 5, 10, 15 years down the line that aren't visible to you, straight away. And talking about potential funders, about the eligibility, priority, viability, and the long-term sustainability of that project. So not just the transfer that you need to do just now and the work that you have in mind to improve that facility, but also those aspirations further down the line. So do you really know, how much that's going to cost, what it's going to take, how long it's going to take, how much work it's going to be, and what help you would be able to get from the local authority? Because sometimes the local authority wants to see that asset develop, and they may enter into some partnership about that ongoing development if that's in their interest as well as in your interest. So that suitability thing, there's technical work in there, but it's also just thinking at a very, very high level. So what do we want our club to be? What facility do we want to have in the future? And is this the right place for us? Just because it's your historical home, it may not be the right place for you to be for the rest of time. So thinking about that and tailoring your CAT application to suit those aspirations.
So something we touched upon earlier is whether or not it's obviously called a community asset transfer, but actually it might not be an asset. And there's something you might want to think about is whether or not it is an asset or whether it might be a liability. And actually, this is a kind of a readiness test prepared by the Scottish FA, which we find really, really helpful. And this is a little exercise that you could do if you have, if you're using a current facility and you're wondering about whether or not to take the next step. You can almost do a scoring system here. So giving yourself a point for a yes on one of these and a -1 for a no on some of these answers, and working out what your kind of scale is, and that should correlate to the kind of the color there in terms of whether or not it's a green or a red. And it's a really sort of valuable test that you can do internally to try and work out how important this will be to your development as an organization. Sometimes a council might be very happy to give you an asset if it's not particularly valuable to them. So be very conscious of that. That's why we've seen a lot of libraries being transferred, because they're sort of quite happy to get rid of them. There's no sort of value to them. So you might want to think about about it in those terms as well. Is that something you could go away and have a look with your current board of committee?
I think the way that sports clubs operate are different from the way that local authorities operate as well. So what may be a liability for the local authority may be an asset for you because you have a different operating model, different cost base. So actually just transferring it into the community turns it from a liability into an asset. But being really clear about that before you enter into this is important. And this is just a really kind of a ready reckoner, really a very, very quick calculation. It's not too scientific, but gives you an idea that, whether you've thought of everything you need to.
Yeah, and actually, this is the kind of thing that you might want to include within your business plan as well when demonstrating your desire to progress with an application.
Okay, so what we're showing you now, we won't go, it's probably not easily readable on screen here. The Development Trust Association Scotland that we mentioned earlier, they have this resource. It's best, printed up as a big poster, but it's a very, very good overview of the route map, the process that you need to follow in order to take the idea from the bottom left-hand corner there, follow this route map through to a successful asset transfer. And it says that there's some really, really clear steps you need to go through, conversations that you need to have before you start any of the hard work of documenting your business plan, your feasibility study, or anything else. I mean, really that the hard, concrete work of documenting those things starts in phases 3 and 4. Phases 1 and 2 are about thinking about the idea, having conversations with people, having conversations with the local authority about what might be possible, what they're interested in, what their criteria are for assessing your application. Also talking to your club, your members, about what they want, what's not possible at the moment that they would really, really like, that would keep them engaged. Talking to your community about what would attract them to bowls as a sport. Talking to other partners, as we've mentioned before, that might be interested in teaming up with you to potentially entering into a partnership. To do this transfer. So all of those things are in the early phases of this route map. And it shows that there are some decision points as you go through it. There's some hard work that you need to do, but don't enter that hard work. Don't document your business plan and your feasibility study until the right point in that route map. You don't do it too early before you've really had conversations with people to understand what it is. Because if you document things too early, it constrains your thinking. And what you really want to be is have a wide open view of what might be possible first, and then narrow down to the right options. So this is one side of that poster, and on the back of it, there's an even harder to read set of information. Again, this is great stuff if you print it out in large scale, and you can download this from DTAS. But this really just describes each of those steps on the route map in detail, from getting started, researching your ideas, developing those ideas, and then the actual formal transfer process. And the formal transfer process is something that's documented in the legislation back from 2014. So this is taken directly from the legislation and the guidance the Scottish Government put in place to allow you to access the asset transfer process. And it refers to your club as a community transfer body. As we said before, there are some eligibility criteria for that, depending on which type of asset transfer you want to do. But you're referred to as the community transfer body, and the relevant authority is the owner of the facility just now. In most cases, that's the local council, but it can be any publicly owned land. So the fire service, a school, anything that's in the public sector that has land, you have the right as a community transfer body to apply for an asset transfer on that. It doesn't guarantee that they will say yes to that application, but you have the right to apply for it. And once you put that application in, once you start those discussions, there's a prescriptive process that both parties have to follow, and it's about conversation, discussion, negotiation, to work towards a successful outcome together. So as you go through that, if you don't get the answer that you're looking for at any stage, there are appeals processes there as well. So you submit your formal asset transfer request halfway down in that process, and if the council, the relevant authority, says no, and you think they've maybe overlooked something important, there is an appeals process, a review process for that. and then you can then go back through that step again. And then further down the line, if you're unable to conclude the contract, again, there's an appeal process that helps you kind of work through that. Most things are up for negotiation. If you have the relevant authority is open to an asset transfer and you have a clearly identified community need and you meet those criteria, often that's just about negotiation and you have the right to walk away at any stage. The relevant authority doesn't have the right to walk away. They have to stay engaged in that process until it's complete and any appeals that you have been concluded. So it's like a very clear process. It lays it out from top to bottom, from beginning to end, that says, so this is what you need to do and when. So a lot of detail that's been documented together with that legislation that shows you how to successfully get through those steps.
We should point out as well that this should be kind of a partnership arrangement that you have with the relevant authority. So they are required to provide support and resource to members of their community around this. So where it says relevant authority provides information as required, a lot of authorities will have on their website the list of all their own facilities that you could request to transfer. As well, what we've seen over the last kind of 10 years is more and more councils having somebody within their local department basically that is responsible for community asset transfers. So do a bit of research, find out who it is that you would need to make contact with, ask about those facilities that you're interested with. Don't necessarily lodge your application in straight away, but start a dialogue as well. Make that kind of a mutually beneficial partnership as well. And that as we say, that person is there to try and make your life easier as well. So it is worth doing a bit of research, finding out who that person is, finding out what kind of support the local council will offer. That will vary from authority to authority. If you go on Perth and Kinross, for example, they've got a really, really lovely YouTube video about the kind of process. Others have maybe not done quite so much work on this area, but it's increasing. I think research is showing it that the amount of support over the years is increasing. So, as we say, do a bit of research, find out what your local council is able to offer you in terms of support with this process.
And that early engagement is about having a shared view on the community need and the priorities for the community. Most publicly held organisations have a community need. They understand that they're there to deliver a benefit to the community as well. And if you can align with that in the early stage, so talk to, if it's a council facility that you're currently using, ask the council what their priorities are, what their development plan is for the area, and how you can help deliver that. What services they want to provide to your local community around your club, and can you take on share some of the load with them to develop those services through sport, through physical activity, or just through using that facility. And those early discussions are not about the cost of the facility, how much, what price that they want to get for the facility. Those early conversations about what does the community need? What is the council's objectives for that community? What do they see as its priorities? And how can you work together to deliver against some of those? And if you have that partnership in delivering that, it makes the negotiation stage later on a lot easier, because they're in a place where they want to say yes to you, and ideally they see you as a better place to deliver on those community needs than they are.
Absolutely. So now we're looking a bit more at the kind of nuts and bolts of the whole process. This, as we said, is kind of going to be a really key part of the strength of your application. So we're going to look at a few different bits that are going to help strengthen your application, basically. One of this is the feasibility study. So we're really going to get down to the detail here about what it is that you want to do, what you want to achieve with this application, and how prepared are you as an organization to take it on. So, there's a number of different questions you're going to want to ask yourself. Some of these will relate to the liability or asset sort of test that we ran through earlier. But is it really needed? Do you actually really genuinely need this to develop? What can you offer as well? What would happen if coronavirus continues, the facility is unable to open? What will happen to the local community? Who will be disadvantaged by that? Who's going to be missing out? What alternatives might there be as well? So these are all things that you might want to think about when you're going through this study. Where's the nearest accessible facility? If you're on one bowling green just now, what does the other one look like? What's the next closest one look like? Is there something that you might be able to do with the bowls club in there? How many people currently use the site? This is where you want to start collecting some data as soon as possible, really, as well. Think about collecting numbers around usage as well. How many people could use the facility? That's a really important one, because that comes down to one of the things that Alan mentioned earlier about cooperating with the local community and forming partnerships. If there's another organization that might use the bowling facility or the pavilion, for example, for community sessions, the range of different activity that happens within the community, could you go into a discussion with them about what that facility could look like and whether you could do something as a kind of a joint approach? What could be accomplished? So what's your vision for the facility as well? What if you did have ultimate ownership of it, what could you do with it? What would you like to do with it? These are the kind of things where we're talking about feasibility. And then we need to talk about the numbers as well. So how likely is it going to be sustainable in the future? How are you going to make it run? How are you going to make the numbers add up? And what are the alternative options as well? So these are just some of the things you're going to want to think about. And we'll talk about what you actually put in your business plan next.
Yeah. So this again is a checklist that the Scottish Football Association have prepared for clubs that are going through this. There's probably about a dozen items on there that they want you to cover. So this is after you've written your business plan, is it covering all of the right areas? But often this is a good place to start as well, saying, so have we thought through some of these questions? A lot of these are about financials, the break-even figure for the activities, the income and expenditure to operate it. And you can go and find that out by looking at other clubs. So, a similar facility elsewhere, what's the cost to do that? What does maintenance cost? What does supplies cost? And are there different ways of doing that will allow you to kind of deepen your understanding of the costs? Development costs as well. So if there are things that you want to do to improve the facility, do you know what that's going to cost? And are there different approaches to developing that? So it talks about phasing improvement works there. So what would you do in what order? What's going to make most sense in order for this to be a financially sustainable development plan? So you're not taking on too much too soon before you're ready. So all of these things are in the business plan are about the numbers, are about the finances. But it's also about the basic business idea. What is it that you're going to do that's going to appeal to people, that's going to attract funding in, that's going to attract members in, that's going to give them what they want. And the hard numbers need to be in step with your development plan so that you can demonstrate that financial sustainability through that. The business plan also talks about your governance structure. And it talks about links to other partners, to other people who care about the sport that you're offering there. So, and on the next slide, we'll give you, and we'll apologise in advance for the colour scheme here, but this is our 7-section business plan template that we use when we're developing these for clubs. So it's topped and tailed with a bit of commentary. So it starts by talking about your club and the history of your club, your track record, what you've achieved so far, your impact on the community, and says a little bit about how you're structured and how decisions are made, your constitution, your governance processes. Talking about the projects, so what your aspirations are for taking on the community asset transfer, what is the programme for making any improvements, and any changes to the activity that you'd run at your club. How's it going to impact your members, your community, other objectives that are out there, and how are you going to ensure that it's run well and it's sustainable going forward? Then into that feasibility study we've talked about before, so I don't think we need to go through that one again. The viability and sustainability, we separate that out in the business plan to make that really, really clear, and that's really where the hard numbers come in. So we're thinking of that as the financial part of the business plan. Asset management is the ongoing maintenance. So this is getting a really good estimate for how much it costs to keep on running the facility and who's going to do it. So is this something you're going to have to employ somebody to manage? Do you need to take on a staffing approach, as well as taking on ownership of the facility. How's that going to be done? What's your succession plan around that? How are you going to develop those skills? How are you going to manage those people properly? And then, who's going to fund this? Particularly an ownership transfer. But if you're doing significant development as well, whether it's ownership or a lease, where are you going to go for funding for that? What do the funders look for you? Is it going to be one big funder, a lot of small funders? Are they going to be local, national? And what are their priorities? And as I say, it's topped and tailed with a bit of commentary. And a great way we've found to finish a business plan is to then talk about, if we're able to achieve all of this, what's this going to mean for our stakeholders within the sport and outside of the sport? So, Bowl Scotland, what's their strategy for development of the sport over the next few decades, and how can you play a role as a club in developing that sport? What's the national government strategy? So it's active living or its health and well-being agenda. What are the objectives that the country's moving towards through this, and how does it fit with that? How can you help feed into that national strategy and your local authority strategy as well? What is it they want to achieve? What are their priorities for your community, and how can transferring ownership or management of the club to you help deliver that in partnership with others or alone as a Bowls club?
Yeah, and the one that we've not included there, perhaps not strategic fit, but potential partner is community sports hubs. If you're a member of a community sport hub, worth reaching out to them to see what support they might be able to offer as well. If this is going to be something that you could do, because they will ultimately have ties in with Sport Scotland as well. So it's good to do things with as many potential partners as well, and get as many people on board as possible. Okay, so we're drawing towards the end now, but we're going to have a look at 10 kind of key steps to a successful community asset transfer. A lot of these we've kind of already touched upon, so we won't go into too much detail, but we will pick on certain ones. So we've spoken about a partnership approach. It might not necessarily be a multi-sport approach, but it might be a multi-community organisation approach. So there might, as we say, be other organisations out there who are also interested in partnering up to help strengthen the community, essentially. Demonstrating a clear need. I think this is a really interesting one. This is where we're going to have to do a bit of work around what is the appetite for this amongst your membership, but also the wider community, and how are you going to demonstrate that? And I think that's where you could perhaps even do something like a survey, an online survey, where you encourage people to fill it in and give some thoughts about what they see the future of the facility looking like, or your role within the local community as well. And that's really kind of valuable, rich data that you can include within your business plan as well when you're demonstrating the need for what you're doing. Legal advice, we've already spoken about some aspects of what that legal advice might be in terms of your legal structure as a club, and the eligibility criteria, but there might be other things that you'll need to think about as well when it comes to potential contracts or negotiations. So it is worth thinking about having people either on your board that have got a legal background, or finding people, friendly partners that might be able to offer some pro bono advice. The next one we're going to talk about is getting people on board and the skill set, but we're going to talk about that on the next slide, so I won't spend too much time here. If we move down a bit, we'll talk about setting realistic timescales, and this is a really important one, because I think there would be a real rush to try and get something in and submitted, but actually it's worth having a bit of a wider holistic view of this. It often takes about sort of 18 months for a community asset transfer to go through. So, and as we've already talked about, there's a huge amount of work in the lead up to that as well. So be realistic about the amount of work that needs to go into it, but also the process and the timescale of actually, once it's lodged, getting an answer and getting the green light. Again, the real detail is going to lie in the business plan, and we've spoken about that. Demonstrating community benefit. Again, that could be something like a survey, but this is also where you might want to think about, how do you demonstrate your impact more broadly? And this isn't just helpful with your community asset transfer application, but also something that you might just want to do to show your role within the local community. So there's a huge amount of resources online. One really good one is called Impactsaurus, and it offers all sorts of different online templates for you to be able to demonstrate projects that you're doing within the local community and the wider benefit beyond sport itself, which is still, of course, very valuable. And volunteers, we're going to talk about volunteers as well. So we'll look now to the kind of skill set and the volunteers.
Yeah, these are the basic hard skills that you need to complete the community asset transfer process. So you will need to do each of these things. You'll need to demonstrate to the current owner of the bowling club that you have thought through, you've gone into enough detail on each of these aspects. So this looks pretty daunting, I think, to a lot of clubs, that they would need to have all of this expertise. What a lot of clubs often find is that a lot of these skills already exist in their membership, or in people who are very close to their members. So somebody that you know just through playing a game of bowls on a weekend may have a cousin or an uncle or a parent who works in one of these professions. You may have somebody who used to be a member of your club who's moved away. Perhaps a young person that's moved away to go to university and is now qualified in one of these areas, and still has a lot of fondness for your club and would be willing to take on some of the workload of helping you through the community asset transfer from a professional perspective. One of the great advantages of doing that, you may get favourable rates by reaching out to people who are connected to your club already, either directly or indirectly. You find a lot of practices in these professional services have a corporate social responsibility agenda, and they're looking to do projects that benefit the community that they work in. So they may have no link at all to the bowling club, but they work in the same town. So they think, well, this is good for us, and to be shown to do something to help the community that we work in. And that may be an alternative to them sponsoring some activity that you do. Rather than giving you money and putting an advertising board up, they may give you some of their time and their expertise to help you through this process. So going out to each of these and finding out who's in your area is the first step. Talking to them about the club, finding out, asking your members who they know who could help with these steps is part of it. And I think the other side of this is that it builds a relationship that you don't have already. By doing this process, it demonstrates that you're serious about doing this properly. It demonstrates that you're giving people an opportunity to develop their skills around this. And you may find that somebody isn't able to help you in any one of these areas, but they can help you get the help for these areas. So it could be a way of saying, well, yeah, I'm not a funding organization, but actually I'll do a fundraiser for you, and that will pay for your accountancy bill for the community asset transfer. You may find that somebody within local government is able to say, well, actually, we can partner up with you to work on this. This will vary very much from club to club. So some clubs will have all these skills on their doorstep and some won't. So you find that the clubs that are based in an affluent area will have a lot of these skills on their doorsteps. It may be harder to reach out to them and make those connections if you're in an area with multiple deprivation. But you can often find links through your members to people that are willing to help and can help out with this. If you're not able to get any of these for free, for a reduced fee, you need to find out early on in the process how much it's going to cost to bring on an accountant, a lawyer to do the bits of work that you need to do. Speaking to them and getting some estimates, some quotes from a few different providers for that, so you can get best value for money as you go through that. But what we found, over and over and over again, when you start this process, if you're asking that question, you say, well, we're incorporated as a charity, so do you have a favourable rate for us? Or we're just an unincorporated club, we don't have a lot of money. Is there something you can do to help with this? Can you give this as a development project for one of your junior accountants to work on? Explore that with them. And tell those professional service providers what it is that's so great about your club. What is it you're trying to achieve? What is your community benefit that you're trying to deliver? And soften them up. So when you ask them the question about a favourable rate, they might discount it a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think a community asset transfer does take specialist skills, as Alan said there. So it is worth spending the time to try and find people with the right skill set. I mean, the likelihood is that your bowls club will be volunteer run, and most of the community asset transfers that have happened to date have been through volunteer run organisations. So it isn't impossible by any stretch of the imagination. It's it's very viable for you to be able to get a lot of these people on board. Okay, so this sort of brings us to the end of the presentation, really. And what we'll want to do is provide you with an opportunity. Hopefully it's been helpful. Hopefully it's been beneficial. Hopefully you've taken something away from it. Hopefully we haven't put you off it either, because as we say, it is very viable. It's a great opportunity for clubs in the near future, especially to really make the most of community asset transfers and the legislations that's there. But if there's something that's arisen from this webinar that has sort of perked a bit of an interest, we would encourage you to get in touch if it's something that we can address. So our contact details are on the screen just now. Feel free to drop us an email. And as Alan said at the start, what we'll do is we'll collate a lot of the questions that we've been sent, and we will do a follow-up, either a follow-up webinar or a frequently asked question, a question and answer sheet, which will hopefully answer some of your questions. Thank you very much for your attention and bearing what can be quite a dry topic, but hopefully hasn't been too stodgy for you.
And if you're considering an asset transfer, best of luck, and don't hesitate to reach out for help.
Fucking massive.
Cut that out.